well in terms of two things. One, when it was due, it is in the document, but it's pretty vague, and it is due at the end of class. I'm going to actually give some extra time, so I won't make it, I'm not going to close the submission folder for the style guide, the FIP style guide that you're working on that's due today. I'll close that at 8 tonight, so I'll give you some time to work on that. I gave the other class some extra time for it as well. And then the other thing is, probably more crucially, if I'd communicated this better, would have alleviated some of your stress. It's not a finished style guide, it's a work in progress. Like everything that we're doing for the FIP, it's a work in progress. Your logo designs are a work in progress. I don't expect to see a finished logo until week 14 when you submit the finished product for the FIP. I don't expect to see a finished style guide until week 14, and anything and everything else that I submit, or rather have assignments for, as it relates to the FIP, even though it's an isolated assignment, it's worth grades, that's a separate criteria. Ultimately, you're working towards the FIP. So everything is really officially due in its final state at the very, very end of the term, okay? So as you're working on stuff, we do have some animation stuff that we're going to be doing when we get back after midterm. Next week, week 7, we're going to start with animation, whereby you might be doing some animation things for your FIP, and those assignments again will be works in progress until it comes to submitting your FIP officially. Okay. So yeah, for the style guide, really what I'm looking for is essentially just having this list set up in a format that you deem appropriate for your style guide. Okay, so by that I mean you choose your whatever the sort of the aspect ratio is going to be, the document size. Bear in mind that you're not printing this, so you have a print background. You've worked with InDesign. When we start factoring in that the fact that this is going to be printed, we start making different decisions than if it's not going to be printed. Because if it's not going to be printed, sky's the limit in terms of what you can do to your document. If it's going to be print-based or printed, it's then you've got to make choices a little bit differently. So what inks you use, how many inks you use, materials that you're going to print against, so on and so forth, become very, very significant when you start factoring in that you're actually going to produce that as a printed piece. You're not printing this. It is just a digital file that you're going to submit with everything else that you submit for your FIP for my course. So sky's the limit. You can do whatever you want with this style guide. At this point, I would recommend, or what I'm looking for rather, for this assignment that you're handing in tonight, is that you have the pages at least created. You've got the document size, you have the pages created. By pages, I mean any one of these bulleted items, right? So we need a title page. We need some sort of table of contents just to tell us where information is within the document. We need your logo sketches. Now, that's not typically something that you include as part of brand documentation, but it's something I would love to see, okay? So I would like you to include that. It was part of homework, so you can just put it into your document, okay? A black and white logo, vectorized logo, and grayscale, if you have it, and color if you have it, okay? If it's even relevant. Some of you might not have color logos. And I'm not really expecting to see that logo even finished at this point. So if you're just putting in what you have done at this point that you did for the first homework assignment, that's fine. I just want to see something in there so I can get a sense of what this style guide is going to look like. If you don't have the clear space done, no worries, just as long as you have a section that says clear space. If you don't have the sizes done, because the logo is not done, you can just put in placeholder logo for now, just size it, and then when that logo's finished, you just swap out those for the real image. Typographic study, type out all uppercase, all lowercase, literally just go to your keyboard, make that sound while you're doing it, it's official. And then capitalize it, do the same thing, and then all numbers and all special characters. Once you have that block of text, just copy it down however many times you need it to communicate the various typefaces that you're using for your FIP. You might only use one typeface. You might be using Arial, you might have Arial regular, Arial bold, Arial black, Arial rounded, in which case you need to represent those each time, okay? But you're just using the same information, you're just copying and pasting. So some of this would be started, some of it might just be an empty page that has a title called clear space or logo sizes, and that's it, that's all you have done. So think of it like a wireframe. All design really is a wireframe, and you're just dealing with structure and thinking about content or where content's gonna go and how it's gonna be worked into the document. And then you start plugging that information in as time goes on, okay? I literally just have a checklist. I'm just gonna go through this list, the bulleted list that's in the course book, and just go, do they have this? Do they have a page started for this? Do they have a page started for that? I'm not expecting to see anything completed at this point, okay? Again, a lot of these assignments are just sort of, hey, if you get started on this, it's a separate graded feature. So there are grades that are separate from your FIP, but it's connected to your FIP. So you are working on your FIP by just virtue of working on these assignments, okay? So again, apologize for I didn't make this clear enough, so I've posted this, and I didn't reflect the date change in the document, which I should have done, because I did make a change, so I should make that change there. But I do post it here. I always post it on the homepage and send out an email. If it's really, really important, I send out an email and say, hey, read that information on the homepage. So if that wasn't very clear, I apologize. Hopefully, like I say, we'll have a little bit of extra time today that you can work on it in class. I can take a look at whatever you're doing if you want. And you have till about 8 tonight to submit that to the submission folder, okay? Again, work in progress, not completed. Any questions, any concerns?
Do we put it in the style guide folder or the midterm
The
folder?
style guide, yeah. So that's a good question, because next week, of course, week 6 is the midterms can happen week 6, week 7, because reading week happens after week 7. But we have our exam next week, okay? So just show up to class. It's a design exercise. It's something I'm going to give you the 3 hours to work on it. It's FIP related, so again, you're producing something for your FIP, and it just has graded criteria. Did you use this? I'm going to give you a list just like this, and as long as you include that in the design thing that you're doing for the exam, you get a point for it. It really is just, did you do this? Yeah, I get a point. Did you do this? You get a point. If you miss something, you don't get a point for that, right? So it's pretty straightforward. I don't want people to stress out about the midterm. It's a design exercise. It's nothing new, it's nothing unique, and it's geared toward your FIP. If you think hard enough, you might even be able to figure out what it's going to be, but I'm not going to tell you until next week. But it's just a design exercise. It's nothing that you haven't done before. It's nothing that you're not going to do again. And it's something that's directly applied or applicable to your FIP. And you've got the 3 hours to work on it. Any software that you want to use, I don't care what you use for this design exercise. If you prefer to do it by hand and draw it out on paper and do something like that, I'm fine with that as well. It's a concept. I want you to produce a proof of concept for something for the FIP. Again, does this mean that it has to be finished and this is what you have to use for the FIP? No, it isn't. Everything for the FIP is a work in progress at this point. Okay, so everybody's clear. Next week you're going to show up, we're going to have a midterm exam. And I don't want to say exam because that gets everybody concerned, but it is an exam. It's going to be worth grades, 15%, but it's a design feature that's based on your FIP. When you're done it, you'll now have another component to your FIP that you can start working with. Silence.
How many pages for the style guide?
How many pages? What I would recommend is that you create each one of those pages so you have pages there, and if they're blank, or just have the title, clear space, sizes, typography, color, if you have those as titles, that's really all I'm looking for.
Do you have to, let's say pages for the spacing and stuff, and like how much space you use?
Yep.
Like, do I have to write about how much space I use and
When you finish the document, I want you to use the Fanshawe document as a guide, or the Jamie Oliver, or the TELUS, or any of the other ones that we looked at. I want you to look at those and go, what are they communicating? If you include a typography study, I would like some sort of statement about why you've chosen that typeface or those typefaces for your brand. What does it say about your brand? And everything is about a persona, right? Creating characterizations and that sort of thing. So I want you to sort of talk about it as though it's an entity and what it is that those type styles are saying about your brand, okay? So if it's Times New Roman, that's pretty formal, right? If it's Palatino, those are serif typefaces. They're fairly formal, so maybe there's a certain formality to your brand, in which case that's why you've chosen it. If you choose something like a sans serif, like a Helvetica or an Arial, they're a little bit more contemporary in their look. They sort of have a class, a timeless quality to them. So maybe you want your brand to have that. So what you're doing in terms of explanation for anything within your style guide is simply just explaining why you've made those choices, whatever they happen to be. Okay? I'm not looking for an essay. Just like the Fanshawe document, we're talking about 2-3 short paragraphs that just address that specific page's content.
Do you have any specific like page sizes you want in particular?
No, I do not. Sorry, that drew from. No. I want you to come up with your own. So that's why we looked at a few examples. TELUS has a different configuration than the Jamie Oliver. Remember we looked at the Walmart one in class, and it was very long. So you can choose whatever size of page or document that you want to do. And that might say something about your brand as well, depending on how you've set it up.
All right, and are we meant to be including like information about our brand, like temporary information in some of these things, or?
Yeah. So sort of, as I was just explaining, if you include anything such as color, let's say you have your color study in there and you've got your swatches of color. Let's say you have 4 or 5 swatches of color. And those are your brand colors. Just like the Jamie Oliver has, TELUS has it, Fanshawe's has theirs. I want you to depict those colors. I want you to give me the values of those colors. So it could be a Pantone color, the equivalent RGB value, hex value, those sorts of things. And then I want you to explain somewhere within that page that addresses color what those brand colors mean for the brand. What do they represent? Okay? And talk about those things on that page. And again, it only needs to be a few paragraphs that sort of addresses those points that you want to make. So it's not a lot of copy. It really is just a little bit of copy that talks about each one of those things. Clear space. There's not a lot you can say about clear space. It's just a margin that exists around your object, but you might be specifying, well, it needs to be a certain distance because my logo juts out on the right-hand side, so I need to make sure that no other content's going to come in contact with that part that juts out. So you might just address that very quickly. Does that make more sense? Yeah, just whatever you think is relevant for whatever you're addressing in the document, that's what we're looking for in terms of copy. Any other questions? Concerns? That's a concern. Okay, as Margaret was saying too, don't, and I always say this anyway, but don't hesitate to email me if there's a concern about something. If something's unclear, please ask me. I try not to make my documentation too wordy. I have a tendency for doing that. So I'll take stuff out if I think, oh, it's getting to be too wordy, I'm getting a little bit too loquacious. And then sometimes I take out maybe crucial information that is now not being communicated, and I might just do it verbally, but that's not always the best because it's nice to have it written down. So if anything is unclear about anything, just send me an email or ask in class. It's probably beneficial to ask in class, that way everybody benefits from the answer. But or if anything comes to mind that maybe you're not thinking about until a little later on, then don't hesitate to ask later in class if that's the case. Okay, so again, a couple people wandered in, I think, maybe before they heard this, but the style guide for the FIP, your homework, the submission folder will be open until 8 tonight, so you've got a little bit of time to work on that, and I'll try to give you some class time to do that as well today. Okay, I've got some content for you to download for today's. We're just going to do a really, really quick packaging exercise, and I hope some of you brought some scissors. Does anybody bring scissors?
I
Good. Just because I really want you to be able to cut out this template. For those of you that have never used or created a template before and folded one up, it's kind of nice to go through the exercise. It's a very, very simple one. They obviously can get much more complex. I've got some examples of more complex templates. But this is just a really simple one. We'll do the design for it. We're not going to print the design out, but I want to be able to put the design or design it so that you can see visually on screen what it would look like as you apply it to the actual model that you're going to mock up today. So if you've got scissors, it makes it easier. So download these assets, week 5 design and image lesson assets, and we'll get started on that in a moment. Okay, so we're going to work on packaging. We're only spending 1 week on it. You could spend an entire term, all of your classes as well, on package design. There's a lot to it. The packaging component of your FIP is not all that significant, other than you just need to have some form of packaging for your bottles and or your cans, whatever you're doing for your model, your 3D model for your product. So I do want to just quickly address some packaging things, some things to consider when you're developing your packaging. I'm going to supply you with some links that you can use to get templates and that sort of thing for your package. I'm going to give you a template that you can use for your packaging if you prefer. You can mock it up just like what we're going to do in class as part of our lesson today. You can build it in 3D. You can go online and find templates and free resources there. However you want to create your packaging. And by packaging, I mean, what is your bottle and or can going to be in when it's on a store shelf? Okay, so you've got to think, I've got to be able to deliver this bottle, this product, in a store. So it's going to sit on a shelf, or it's going to be part of a store display. So it needs to be in something, okay? Some sort of cardboard or something, or come up with your own sort of idea for it, and we'll look at some examples. That's what I mean by packaging. And part of the reason for that deliverable in terms of the FIP is I want to see how your brand extends to other things than just a label or just a logo, okay? I want to see your brand document addressing a variety of different delivery mechanisms for your product, for your brand, okay? But I don't want you to overthink the packaging. It is quite literally, it could be just a flat package template, much the same as what we're doing in class today, or it can be anything that you want to do, any sort of resource that you find for it. Really what we're trying to do with design just generally, but certainly as it applies to packaging, right, is create that sort of emotional connection, right? We talked about this earlier with visual communications. Why do you buy generic or the cheapest product when you go shopping? But then there are those occasional things, or those specific things where you will pay up because I don't know, you have some sort of attachment to it. It could be something that you've always grown up with. So we talked about maybe ketchup, right? Heinz ketchup. You always have to have Heinz ketchup. It can't be a no-name brand. It has to be Heinz. Is there a reason for that? It could be a flavor profile that is making that choice. And it could just be, hey, that's what we always had in the house growing up, and that's what I'm familiar with, and that's what I like. And so you buy it on the basis of that, right? But that then would fall into sort of this emotional connection that you have with a product that exists. And the phenomenon of that is much more difficult than it sounds in terms of creating it, right? Oftentimes it takes a lot of years to develop that sort of brand allegiance within an audience. As you're building your bottle, I know you're doing a rebrand, or brand refresh is more accurate. You're taking a pre-existing brand and you are making it now more contemporary. You're saying, hey, in the current marketplace, how do I take what possibly could be an antiquated idea and make it fresh and new for a new audience. You are the new audience, right? You don't have any sort of emotional connection with this product, perhaps, because maybe you didn't know it existed or you never had it or grew up with it. So now it's a brand new thing. So what makes you choose that product? Someone that's grown up with it is going to choose it because they grew up with it. They have that emotional connection. But for a new audience, you're trying to address that. You're trying to establish a new sort of emotional resonance with that demographic. So there could be certain things that you can build in as part of your packaging when you're styling it and building it in your 3D program in Cinema 4D that maybe works for a more contemporary sort of marketplace or an audience of today. Sustainability. Maybe you can build in a sustainable feature to it. Because again, that's a buzzword that a lot of people respond to, right? I only want to buy certain products that are sustainable because I believe in that. And so therefore, that might be something that people judge your product by and choose your product on the basis of that sustainability. Healthy solutions, right? Whether it be eliminate harmful effects of things like BPA in plastic, or the ingredients themselves, all natural, organic. Those sorts of things that are sort of key words that communicate that this is a naturally derived ingredient or ingredients, and that might appeal to a certain demographic, more so than something that's artificially flavored and sweetened and so on and so forth. Enviro conscious, so we want to reduce waste. So as I talk about packaging your bottle, your cans of your product, can you do it in a sustainable way that is enviro conscious, meaning that it's biodegradable, it's 100% recyclables, those sorts of things. Even if it's not, put 100% recyclable on your packaging. Not to say you can do that legally. I'm saying you're not actually making the product, so you can put whatever you want on your packaging because you're not actually producing it. Style, emotional response. So again, why are people connecting to it? Why does someone buy a Yeti? I should answer this question because I got a Yeti in my hand. But why did I buy this over the competition that was up on the store shelf? Why do you make the decisions to buy certain things apart from the competition that surrounds them? So people is a big thing. I've got Dan in my other course has done all sorts of market and product research. He's gone out and tested the product. He's done a whole bunch of stuff, which is great because now he has things he can actually point to and say, I tested this, and this is what I found from the results of what my research is telling me. And so he's basing certain decisions off of the research that he has done. So that could be a very telling part of the overall process. Who are the people that you're targeting with this product? That's huge. So you all have this brand, Zima or whatever it is. Who's buying it? And why are they buying it? What makes them a loyal customer? What is that customer base? Once you understand that, you have a much better chance of further communicating that to that audience and then also establishing a new audience as a result of what you know about the pre-existing current audience. What are the requirements of the product? What's unique about your product that makes it stand apart from the competition and that makes the product sort of a coveted thing? Why do you go an extra mile out of your way to buy this particular product because it's sold in this one store versus just going around to the convenience store and grabbing its competition? Okay? If you have people walking an extra mile to get this product, there's something about it that they're connecting with. What is it, and how can you further enhance or explore that uniqueness? And then also the people themselves. What are the aspirations, ideologies, and what are sort of the user-centric goals of the people that are using that product? Benchmarking, taking a look at the competition that are producing similar, in some cases maybe almost identical type products, and take a look at what they're doing. How are they positioning their product? How are they making themselves different and differentiating themselves from the competition, which is you, okay? So benchmarking is a very important part of it, so hopefully you've done a little bit of research about the competition that you're working against. Taking a look at what's out there, both in terms of the packaging, in terms of the bottles themselves or the cans themselves, and any sort of special characteristics that the bottles might have. Now, these are specific to these type of containers, but it could be virtually anything, right? What makes it unique, durable, color, and easy to drink from, so you can reconfigure some of the pre-existing bottle specs if you think that you can somehow improve upon it. If you think that by adding a longer neck to the bottle that is somehow going to enhance the overall delivery of the product, then that's maybe something that you can incorporate in your 3D model, and you would justify that in your document, saying, well, I've changed the bottle bottle configurations a little bit to meet the needs of today's audience. And then, of course, we talked about, brands are personas, right? We want to provide a certain personification of that entity or that brand. If we were to think of it as a person, what sort of person would it be? Now, you probably don't remember this, and it doesn't matter whether you do or you don't. This is an old advertisement that talked about PC and Mac people. Anyone want to take a guess which is the PC person in this example and which is the Mac person? PC's on the left, Mac's on the right. Of course, they're basing it off stereotypes. It's no longer, a perceived stereotype. It doesn't really matter what operating system you happen to be using. You do all the same stuff regardless of what system you're on. But the idea being that they had this stereotype, and therefore they were able to create this personification for their brand. We're talking about a computer system, but yet we're seeing individuals represent that system. And so if you think of your own brand in that way, what would it look like? How would it act? What would its tone of voice be? So on and so forth. We want interactions, so we want those trigger responses. We talked about trigger responses in visual communications. What triggers the response? One, in terms of branding. How do I recognize this as this product? Well, through a variety of branding features, I'll make a connection to that. When I see certain types of animation, or I see certain individuals, maybe that they're sponsors of it, not sponsors, but famous people that are endorsing it, all of those things can help that trigger response that happens with branding. We'll just sort of bypass this, talking about a lot of the stuff that we just looked at in terms of BPA free and durable, just sort of the catchphrases that you can utilize to help your product really stand out and touch on those things that might be important to your audience. Creating a hero's journey, you should do this with everything that you do. Again, if you think of this as a person, what is the journey that they're going to go through? And then likewise, what is the associated journey of those people that are using the product? What are you sort of hoping to establish with that audience? So we want to attract, we want to engage. We do that visually with a lot of the design visuals that we create, your fancy labels and your packaging and your unique packaging. That's a way of engaging your audience, right? And we'll take a look at a couple examples in a moment. How do we adopt those people into our sort of our community? Moment of truth. Obviously, the product itself has to prove or pay off. If it's claiming it tastes great, it better taste great. If it doesn't taste great, then the claim isn't being withheld, isn't being honored. So again, we're making a promise. We want to make sure we're delivering on that promise. Proselytize, that's what we're doing through advertisement, right? We're trying to get people to use this product, and we're doing so by presenting all sorts of attributes or positive things that are associated with this product. And then the viral demand, word of mouth is an example of that. What is that you've got there? Well, this is this. Is it good? Yeah, it's really good. Can I try it? Yeah, you can try it. We try it, and they're like, okay, that's pretty good. I'll buy myself one. And that's that idea of demand being proliferated. So here's an example, right? You go to the store, you go to the milk aisle. They've got all sorts of containers, different brands, different milk, but you can see that they more or less look the same on the store shelf. There's not a lot of differentiation between milk products. One's in a plastic container with a handle, one's in a carton, but they're really, really similar, and they sort of conform to that structure. And then here, now granted this is soy milk, but we have packaging that is just very distinct and very different, and it's also very fun. It plays off of that sort of where the milk comes from. In this case, obviously it's not coming from a cow, but it has a lot of those qualities. And then again, utilizing that green to communicate the idea that it's all natural, and it's not actually a milk product, so they're sort of having fun playing with that. We've got the leaf, and so on and so forth. And so, kind of an interesting little bit of packaging. You can do this with your FIP, right? You're saying, hey, how can I make mine different? This is a potential idea. Making sure that there's uniform branding happening with everything you produce. So whether it's your commercial, whether it's your packaging, whether it's your label, whether it's your style guide, whether it's your whatever that you're creating for your FIP, when I look at it in isolation, I should be seeing that it's all part of a shared brand experience. As we can see with this, we have different bones, different sizes, different shapes, different dogs for each one of those products. But we know that in isolation, I would be able to connect it back to this product line because that shared brand styling across all of it. So be very consistent with how you are presenting your brand on everything that you're using your brand for. That's why you have a style guide, is to follow that. Another really good example of it here where we have these tees. So again, just structurally, these are all the different tees that they're offering. We've got this illustrated style here on the left-hand side. We have the titles in a specific typeface and then a little bit of a descriptor. This is the same every time, different color, different information, but structurally the same. That color ties in with this sort of color blotch that happens on the illustration. So you can see that when you put them all together, there's a unified brand experience. When they're isolated, it's a beautiful piece of design, but you make a connection to all the other products within that product line because of the consistency from element to element. Doesn't mean everything has to be identical. It just means that certain style features need to be represented consistently from product to product. Idea there, it's all the same stuff, same idea. Now with packaging, I want you to sort of explore, what can I do that's unique? Like the soy milk, my product is going to be out there on the store shelf. How is the packaging going to help sell my product? Okay, so it's another way of engaging your audience. To me, this looks pretty darn cool. You've got these Kleenex, so these tissues that have these fruit scents to them, and that's just one line of product that they're selling. But the product itself, the packaging rather, that dispenses the product is in an actual slice of that fruit. So it's kind of a clever, it's still supportive, just like a standard Kleenex box is. It still sits flat, but it's just a different take on it, sort of a nice change to the standard rectangle that we typically, rectangle or square that we typically see with this type of product. It could be as simple as something like this, where you're just sort of using a card that's actually sealing the bag, and then they use a die cut to cut out these unique shapes, and then that product in its color, so the texture and color of the product show through that die cut, and you can have all sorts of interesting die cuts that utilize or play off of the color and texture of the object that's sitting behind it in the bag. And so again, unified experience, brand experience. We know this one, again, not to be proselytizing Mac, but Mac is a pretty impressive thing when it comes down to packaging. And it's just sort of this multifaceted, multi-layered packaging, in the sense that it's, you don't just tear it open and start using it. It sort of comes apart piece by piece by piece, and that's an intentional part of the overall idea behind it and how everything's sort of bundled in. Someone made the joke yesterday, this must be old because there's headphones in there. Mac doesn't give anything away for free. They'll charge you for that now. But nevertheless, very cool. Now what happens when we pull this off of this? This is the lid, that's the base. What happens? What's that?
So usually if you're not aware of it, once you take it out.
Well, the face has the two sides and full glossy color, the exact foam that you're opening. But does anybody know, certainly some of you, I know some of you are Mac people, what happens whenever you take the lid off of the base of any packaging? Whether it's the phone, whether it's a laptop, whether it's an iPad, what have you. What's that?
But then, you know, we have like your cord, like, you know, your power cables and what's not.
Yeah, you do have that. But what happens is it's vacuum sealed.
Oh.
The lid is so closely tight to the base, and it's a very rigid material that when you pull that lid, it's actually pretty difficult to sort of just pull it out because it is vacuum sealed. And so you have that very dramatic sort of thing when you open it up. I know it's a small thing, but all of those elements are tied into an overall experience, and it's very much communicated through this product line. So different ways of, again, communicating. So here's just some basic packaging. This is a 4-bottle box carrier that you could build or utilize and do some interesting things with. You can modify and change the shape of your container to some extent if you think it's going to benefit the product as it stands in the current marketplace. Got that one on the right hand side. I thought you might like this one, the dynamite. So it's hot sauce, but it's in, looks like a stick of dynamite, and there's a cork with a wick in it. So kind of plays off of that. Right, milk products, and it looks sort of like what milk might have looked like at one point in time when it was being delivered to the house and it was left on the doorstep. So they're playing off of that idea, very clean. So it's obviously not old, and we can tell it's modern, it's very clean and sophisticated, but it is playing off of that idea. Even the packaging itself is very thick and rigid, as though it's sort of like a wood box that they might have used at one time. This idea that we've got this sort of cut through the bottle, the Samurai, and then the packaging itself the bottle goes in is also re-communicating or echoing that same idea, so that it's just being reinforced with every layer of design or packaging that we're dealing with. So this is clever sort of marketing, right? We put these this gum, looks like the teeth of the dinosaur, and if you make it cute and cuddly, you've got kids as an audience that are going to want to get that because it's cool. And then, of course, it comes in all these different colors. They're not any different in terms of design, but they're all different colors. And so you want to collect all the colors. Very, very clever when you have multiple colors of the same thing or similar thing. And so you end up collecting those, and you've got a shelf full of those at one point or another because you wanted to get all the colors. Spaghetti, so this is sort of a, I don't know, it's New York spaghetti, but it's high-end spaghetti, dry spaghetti. I'm not sure, but it certainly looks high-end based on the sort of the typographic styling and the packaging and sort of the sparseness of it. But then just using sort of the New York skyline to display those their spaghetti. Tea, really clever idea, just so it hangs out in your teacup. Someone's stealing your sandwiches at lunch, just put it in a bag that has mold on it or what looks like mold. No one steals your sandwiches after that. And this is sort of creepy, but at the same time very fun. And sometimes you buy things just, does anybody ever buy, or has anybody ever bought packaging just because the packaging itself was kind of cool? I own a few products like that where it's like, oh, that's actually very, very clever. There's something unique about it. So these are just ideas from what the assignment used to be, just binding together two different products and making it one. So Cascade line, which is gross, obviously, but it's to see if you can pull it off stylistically is another thing. So again, just to sort of reiterate, let's create a story, some characteristics that you can use as part of your brand, whether the ethos and values and ethics that might be tied to it in some way. You can create those things. They don't have to be pre-existing things. This is partly a creative exercise, so what you can bring into it could help redefine it so that it partly refreshes this whole product. As you're thinking about packaging, and we're going to look at this today, and we're going to design for this today, but bear in mind that with packaging, panels are very, very important. Obviously, it's likely to be forward-facing on the store shelf. So what's on the front needs to communicate all the things that need to be communicated for an audience that is going to make an informed choice of choosing your product opposed to the one that's sitting next to it, the competition, right? So the forward-facing design and communication is very important, but that doesn't mean that this container is always going to be forward-facing. So you want to make sure that you're echoing the design style, the design aesthetic, all around, top, back, sides, bottom even, if it tips over, you want to make sure that there's some sort of shared visual on all of those panels, so that in a store, maybe they have a little display out on the floor, in which case we're seeing those containers from all angles, not just the front. Target audience, make sure you know who your audience is, that demographic, that's what you're designing this for and toward that group of people. Doesn't mean that there might not be other people that could also be part of that overall shared experience, but there's definitely a market out there for your particular product, so you need to know who those people are and how to communicate to those people. So I have this very busy sort of marketplace, all sorts of things going on there. The idea being is, how does one store communicate to an individual while all the other stores are sort of just irrelevant to that individual? So make sure you're tailoring your experience to meet those expectations and meet those people. Customer attitudes, beliefs, get to know your audience, very, very important. Don't be a Rolls-Royce brand for a utility Jeep audience. Know your audience and what they're going to respond to. Who was showing me watches? Someone was showing me watches earlier in the term. You were showing me, yeah, you got all the high-end watches, right? Those are gorgeous websites. They have to be, because the watches are gorgeous. Imagine if you had the watches and everything was, let's go Comic Sans, I'll say it. We'll go Comic Sans, it just isn't, or Papyrus or whatever, it's not going to sell those watches. It's not going to be sort of evocative of what that brand experience is all about. So here's your high end, right? And there's a certain expectation by a certain audience that wants and expects this and needs that to be delivered to them. And then there are others that are satisfied, or that's their preference, is to go on the other end of the spectrum. So you do need to know who your audience is and how to design for that. There we go, there's our watch there. Who am I? What makes me special? Why should you buy me? What is it? Is it because I absolutely love to tell time? Could be. I'm just in love with telling time, so that's maybe it. Maybe it's because I just love the style of an object like this. It could also be a status thing. I want to sort of show off a little bit. There's a variety of reasons why someone makes a purchase, and you sort of need to tap into what those reasons are and see if you can sort of communicate those things to those people. I'm special because, so the product attributes, again, hopefully you're considering that with your own product. What makes a Ferrari, right? Why does someone buy it? Well, there's a reason for it. If you can afford it, beyond that, there's got to be other reasons. Who's the competition? We talked about that. And again, remember that the surface area is a very unique part of the story that you're telling. Bear in mind that these are cylinders that you're working with, right? This is a cylinder. And communication on a cylinder functions differently than it does against a flat rectangle or a square. It wraps, so it can distort your typography, it can distort your images, it can make things look unattractive very quickly because of that distortion. That's why oftentimes when you see beer products and labels like that, they're oftentimes sort of insignia or emblem based, and they're in ovals because an oval works really nicely against a cylinder. It sort of naturally contours to that. So that's what you need to do, is consider that when you create a label, you're doing so as probably a rectangle or a square that's going to be applied to a cylinder. So how does that information get communicated? Okay, packaging is the same thing. These are all panels. Those panels are going to be always visible depending on where you're viewing it from. So you want to make sure that there's some branding that's being pushed through all of those panels, so you always know what that is. And also, what happens oftentimes when I take whatever I've purchased out of this box? What happens to the box? It gets thrown away, right? So your branding's lost at that point. You spent all that money to get that packaging printed, designed, so on and so forth, and someone is now just throwing it away. So what you need to do is you need to repeat what's going on here stylistically with your bottle and your labeling, so that there's a connection between those two things, so that if this is in isolation from that, which it likely will be, then this is then this is still doing its job, still advertising and working in terms of a brand. Okay, so here's a clever idea where the package actually has a window in it, so you can see not only the branding on the packaging, but then also the branding that's part of the bottles that sit inside the product. And you make a connection between the visuals that are happening here on the box with the visuals that are happening with the labels on your bottles. Again, I've had a few people ask, can we change our product? To some extent, yes, you can. If you have a product that is a pop, it still needs to be a pop, okay? This is a brand refresh. You're sort of making it something new out of something old, but it is still connected to that original thing. So it still needs to be a pop. If it's a milk product, it still needs to be a milk product. Does that mean that you can't add flavors? No, it means absolutely you should be thinking about adding flavors or maybe different types of milk, almond milk, soy milk on top of just regular 1%, 2%, 3% milk. So you can have a variety of things to work from. But as soon as you create a variety, you create a dilemma for yourself in that the brand can become watered down or difficult to see the brand consistency if you have changed it too much. So as we're looking at up here, this is all the same product. You know, looking at this, that's the same product because of certain things that are built into that design. The label's applied the same way, has the same lid, it has the same logo, same information, same placement, same location on the bottle, on the label. The only thing that's changing is maybe the visuals down here and the color, which is then communicated with the cap and the liquid itself. So there are things that are different, but there are also things that are the same, which makes it a shared brand experience. Likewise here, also thinking about store shelf, how am I going to display this? Very, very clever, playing off of the idea of the chili peppers, the shoes, taking the shoes away, you're carrying it by its laces. The laces are hooked into the illustration on the box, so it looks like you're actually carrying the laces of the shoes. Just some really clever ideas. Even just flaps on a box, all boxes have flaps on them, and for these dog treats, just having a flap up can make it look like dog's ears. Just sort of a cute little thing if you're into that. All right, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a basic template, we'll design for it, and then I'm gonna have you cut the template out and fold it up so that you can see what it actually is once it's all put together. I don't have it in color, I didn't print it out in color. I quite literally just printed out the template so we can cut it out. But by designing it in Illustrator, I think you'll get the idea of what it would look like if it were printed out in color. So from that file that you've downloaded, let's go and open that up. So the Illustrator file that's in there. And it's just this one, this 05 template for tea candle package. So it's a little tea candle. This is not to scale, so I've made it significantly smaller than what an actual tea candle would be. The reason for that is so that I could print it out on a reasonable sized piece of paper and I wouldn't have to print it out on really large stock. Tea candles are not, or tea lights are not very large, but this again is not to scale, just so that it's more manageable in terms of printing and for us working with it in class. Okay, doesn't really matter where you create your print information. You can use Photoshop. If you're using Photoshop, make sure that the document you set up is set to 300 DPI, dots per inch, right? We need resolution to be very, very high so that when we print, it's a nice crisp image. If it's Illustrator, it's a resolution independent application, doesn't matter. So as long as it's the object that you've drawn is to the size you want it to be, then it's gonna be crisp and clean, so that's why we're using Illustrator. We could be doing this in InDesign, it really doesn't matter. But because we know Illustrator maybe a little bit better than InDesign, I thought we'd just do it here. So the top part is what is actually a lid, and it inserts, the bottom part here gets folded up and is inserted into the lid of this object up top, okay? And that will make more sense to you when you cut it out and actually build it yourself. For those of you that have never worked with a template before, That's why we're doing this, because they can be very, very difficult, especially just looking at it and trying to make sense of it. That can be a very difficult thing to do. So it helps if you can cut them out, fold them up. Even if you do your packaging for your FIP as a 3D element in Cinema 4D or whatever application you're using for it, I would still recommend printing it out and trying to mock it up. Mocking it up is a great way of understanding how the panels work and so on and so forth. So we're not going to do anything with the bottom. The bottom is just an insert. We could consider having it in the branded color. So maybe each candle has its own scent profile. So maybe this would be in the color of that particular scent. And probably this is where our tea light would go. We would probably have some sort of written statement underneath where that tea light sits that says don't leave candles unattended, candles can start fires, all of that sort of stuff, right? So we could build all that into it. We're not going to, but we could. We're just going to focus on this up here. So a very simple little design. Let's just go to our rectangle tool, and we're going to go to the left-hand side and go to that first set of that first dashed line, vertical line. And we just want to draw a shape over top of that and extend to the other dotted line on the right-hand side. We'll get rid of the stroke value. We don't need that on there, so we'll get rid of that. And then we're going to apply a brand color to it. So if we go up to Window and we go to Color, we'll open up that color window. And bundled in with that, you should see swatches. So if I click on swatches, there are a bunch of swatches already started as part of that window. Yes? I'm using color, so just go Window and then go down to Color. And then it's, if it's set up like mine, it will be the second tab, swatches. If it's not bundled in, the swatches window's just down there. Okay, so there's all sorts of swatches to choose from. We don't use libraries in class just because the IT department they do not like libraries or fonts and things like that, because that would mean that we have access to installing things on the operating system which they don't like, and I can understand why, right? It's a security thing. So we don't really utilize libraries, but libraries are immensely powerful, and especially for things like this, where we can now just grab content that other people have created for the purpose of using these programs. So Adobe builds their own, and that's what we're going to use, is largely Adobe assets that they have built and bundled in as part of the software, but there are also external assets that other people, users, have created that you can take advantage of. So look at your libraries. It's a great way to sort of explore different, especially if you're not good with color. There's all sorts of things that people have put together, color combinations. If you're not good with color, you just use someone else's, right? That they've already done it. So let's go to the hamburger menu within our swatches window. And we'll go down to the Open Swatch Library, third option from the bottom. And you can see all sorts of stuff. So if I go into gradients, there's all sorts of gradients in there, sky gradients, metal gradients, so if you're trying to get something to look like metal, or gems and jewels. Some of this might need to be customized because it might not necessarily be perfect for you, but it's a good starting point. Fruits and vegetables and so on and so forth. You can sort of see all of that. And as you can see, there's all sorts of things that you can choose from to work from in terms of swatches. So again, if you're not strong with color, this is a great place to start if you want to do it within inside of Adobe. There's all sorts of online resources that allow you to do this as well. So what we want to do is we want to go into what are called color books. So we're going to use the Pantone matching system. A Pantone matching system, as I said before, is a color system for print, which are specially mixed values of color using your process colors, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And they've got thousands of colors to choose from. And by using Pantone or a matching system that is found inside any sort of color book that is sort of universally used, Pantone's one of the most universal color matching system systems out there in terms of print. I can create this document here in London, and send it to somewhere halfway across the world to get it printed, and it will print exactly as I expect it to with the Pantone values that I put in place. Because these are mixed values based on the percentages of magenta, cyan, black, and yellow. So it's guaranteed to be the same no matter where we print it. So it's equivalent to the idea of hex values. Hex values are less accurate because based on your computer calibration or your monitor calibration or what color system you have set up for your monitor and your brightness, that's going to affect your hex value. So what we want to do is we want to go down to this Pantone CMYK coated. It's going to have a coated surface because I want this design, this box, to have a little bit of a sheen to it. So I'm going to go to Pantone plus CMYK coated. CMYK just means there's a CMYK equivalent value to the Pantone number we're going to put in. So what we want to do is we want to type 160. When I put in 160, it's going to give me a range of Pantone values that sit within that spectrum. And the spectrum that we're looking at is sort of this lime green spectrum, which is sort of our brand area. But I want to specify a very specific part of that range for my brand. So my brand color is 160-8. So if you put -8, then it narrows it down to a single Pantone value, and that's the Pantone value that is one of my branded colors for this product. Take that little thumbnail and drag it into your swatches, and it will show up at the bottom. You can custom create your own little swatch folder. So if you have a project, FIP for instance, you could create a folder with this folder down here. Just call it FIP colors or whatever you want, and then drag all of those swatches into your folder. And then that way you've got that folder, all your swatches are in there for that project. The library is right here. So if you want to re-access or go to other libraries, you can bring that up and do it that way. Okay. Okay, so we've got this object. This is going to be the color label that wraps around the top and the sides of our box. So what you do is you select that object. We're just going to fill it with that Pantone value. And then what I want you to do is zoom in a little bit and try to get this top edge right on that dotted line. Okay? Have it sit directly on that dotted line. Same with the bottom. And then over here, I'm going to go to the dotted line, just pull it out a little bit. So I'm going to cover up the dotted line on the left and on the right. Okay, so this is what we're doing is something similar to having a bleed in InDesign or for a print document. That margin that sits outside of your document size, 8.5 by 11 as an example, this would be we used a 1/8 of an inch bleed margin for our Fanshawe document. And that allowed us to put content outside of the document to ensure that any content that goes outside the document will show up when they cut down the job to size. So as long as the registration for this job being printed is accurate, then there should be no problem. This color should sit exactly where it was. I don't want to extend beyond here, because beyond that dotted line is now going to be the face of that side, likewise the face of that side. So I don't want any green overlapping onto the face of it. In this case, I want to make sure there's enough green so that this actually sits inside the box. I want there to be green in there, but this is a flap that gets folded in, you won't see it. So it doesn't need to be green. Now you might be thinking, well, just make it all green. What, why bother? You could. But print, again, is a costly process, and it may not seem like a lot for a little flap here and a flap there to have green, but if I print out 10,000 of these, because I've got a lot of product to sell, that's a lot of ink that's just being wasted for a flap that's going to be folded under, you're not going to see it. So with print, you always have to have those considerations. With our world, doesn't matter, right? You make a mistake with the logo, not a good thing. The client's going to say, hey, you've misspelled our name in our logo. What's the deal with that? But I can fix that very, very quickly. I just upload it to the FTP, boom, and it's done, right? So this is a much more costly mistake if we make an error with our print documentation. Let's go back to your folder and just open up this aroma text copy file, and we're just going to use that to copy paste our information. So the first thing we're going to do, you can leave off the trademark. The trademark was giving us a little bit of a problem yesterday, mainly because I've taken this template, I've made it a little bit smaller, and so the trademark just sort of it just sort of cramps in that space. This isn't to size. If it were to size, then it wouldn't be an issue. But because I scaled it down, let's just do away with the trademark for right now, or add it in later. So just copy aroma. That's the brand name. Take your text tool, just click anywhere it's going to paste in Lorem Ipsum, just replace it with aroma. Select aroma text. Open up your character window. If you're not seeing your character window, just go down to type and just make sure character gets checked off. Or you can use the contextual menu up top. I like working in the window myself, but that's up to you. And then let's change it to 36. And the typeface that we're using, not surprisingly, we're going to use Arial, just because, again, everybody has Arial. But we want to use Arial rounded if you have it, all right, if you have it. If you don't have it, just use regular. But if you have Arial rounded, which I think most of you do, that's what this is. Okay, so just going to place that there. And then we'll just resize it, get it down to size. Again, we're going to eyeball this because I have scaled this template down, so it's not going to, the actual typeface was 36 points, but clearly that's too large for this. So if we bring it down to about 27, it should fit nicely inside of that area. And just sit at center inside of that. So that is the top of the box. So when we're looking down on the box, that is what we're looking at. Now I would, in this case for the top, what I'm going to use is an effect. I'm going to deboss this. Okay. So everybody's familiar with embossing and debossing, yeah? No? Maybe? Well, you've heard of emboss. What is embossing? If I emboss something, what am I doing? So embossing is a raised surface. So think of it like a think of it like a stamp, right? A stamp has a surface, and then it has raised portions to it, and that acts as the stamp. You apply the ink to the raised part of it, and you push it against a piece of paper, and the raised part of it leaves the ink behind, and then the surface, there's nothing there because there's no ink on it, right? It's away from that raised surface. If I were to push that stamp in really, really hard, I would leave an imprint, and I would push the paper out as a result of pushing the stamp underneath. That is embossing. It's a raised surface, the raised characteristics of whatever it is that we're using. So if I wanted to emboss aroma, it would be, when I touched it, if I passed my finger over it, it would feel bumpy because it's raised, right? Debossing is the opposite. It's if I'm pushing it in, I'm making an imprint into it. So if I press my finger over it, it's sort of bumpy, but it's indented, it's inverse to embossing, okay? So that's all it is. I want to have this as a debossed text, and I would leave it in black, and I would communicate to my printer any effect, any sort of visual effect that you want to create that isn't a printed effect. So debossing, embossing is not printed, it's actually being depressed into the material. I would leave it black, at size, styled, everything is exactly how I want it to look, and I would communicate to my printer, I don't want black text there. That is just simply telling you that's what I want as a debossed or embossed feature. They need to know that so they don't print it in black. If you leave it as black and don't tell them, all your lids are going to have black, which isn't a problem. It looks actually pretty good, but that's not what I want. I want an effect. And so I need to communicate that to the printer. And I also have to find out if they can actually do that, because not all printers are capable of doing it, most are. But if they are able to do it, then I say, okay, the black text is supposed to be debossed, and then they go ahead and do it. When I get it back, it's going to look green, just like everything else, but it might just be a little bit deeper green because light is affecting it differently, all right? Because it's recessed. So when you're looking at that, I don't want you to mistake that as that's how it's going to look. It's actually just how you would leave it for the printer to have that effect. So let's make it 27 points, and it does actually have some tracking applied to it. So let's just go in and we'll put in, I think it was 50, but again, that is based on the original size. But I'll put 50 in, it looks like it's pretty good. If you want your guides, if you want rulers, if you're sort of trying to measure it, just pull your guides out, put them against that dashed line, and that way you can sort of work aroma into that area. So I've got mine set to 27 points in size. It's Arial rounded, bold, and I have tracking applied to it. I've got 50 set for tracking. So again, tracking is just applying spacing to all of the spacing characters in between the letter forms. Okay, so we're making it look aired out. We're spreading it out a little bit. Okay, if you wanted to sort of see what it might look like, then let's go to Window and we'll open up Appearance and we'll open up Transparency. Okay, it's really transparency that we're mainly going to affect, but appearance is nice to have open as well. So I've got those in a window, and if I go to Appearance, I can apply my outlines and strokes. I can have multiple outlines and multiple strokes on an object. And if I go to Appearance, I can change my blending modes, just like we do in Photoshop, right? I don't have as many options in Illustrator because it's not Photoshop, it is a photorealistic process, but I have the main ones that I can access in Photoshop. So what I want us to do is just go down to Overlay, put Overlay on, turns it yellow because it's intensifying that green that's sitting below it. And then where it says opacity, just type in 25. So that's more or less what the debossed feature is going to look like. It's going to be this very faint. It will have some slight shadows though, so it would be a little bit more defined than what we're seeing here because of those shadows. But that's essentially what it would look like when we get it printed. Yes?
Can you do that one more time?
Sure can, yeah. So after you have your aroma done, just select the word, open up your transparency window. So just down in window, go transparency. And then I just applied a blending mode, overlay blending mode to it. And then switch the opacity value of that blending mode to 25%. Okay, so that is now the top. What we want is, again, if we're stacking this on the store shelf, these are little guys, so we can stack quite a lot of product on top of itself. We're not going to see the top at all if it's on a store shelf. So we need to have, our front panel needs to be communicating the majority of the information because that's how it's going to sit on the store shelf. So this is our front panel right here. So let's go back and grab, actually we just reuse this aroma if we want. So we'll just take this aroma, drag it down. We're going to have to change the size. So hold down Option or hold down Alt, hold down Shift to sort of align it with aroma from the top. Select it, and we're going to make it the green, so it's the same green. It's 160 by 160-6, or 8 rather, Pantone. And we're just going to make it a little bit smaller, so we're going to make it 24 points. We'll leave the tracking at 50. We probably should go and adjust that as well, but we'll just leave it. Actually, we should. It's not right. So we'll go into the tracking and just make it 25. And again, because if you copied and pasted it or dragged it, it's still overlay, text, and transparency, and it has opacity. So we need to take that back to normal and take it back to 100%. Okay? There we are. Okay, we're going to go back to our text document. This one's called Tantalizing Mint. They all have these sort of unique names to them. and this is what it's gonna smell like. So it's a mint scented candle. So we'll take that text and bring it over. Just click on your text tool, just click, it's gonna paste in Lorem Ipsum, paste in Tantalizing Mint. Select that, we're gonna change that from Arial Round to Times New Roman. Or Times Roman, I guess. Make it green, same green. Scale it down, it's gonna be quite small, so I've got mine set for 8 points, which is ridiculously small, and the only reason for that again is because this is not to scale, so it is a lot smaller than it actually would be. But the Tantalizing Mint should more or less line up with the aroma text that sits above it. And then just move it down visually from there. Now we're not trying to line it up with the right-hand side. It's supposed to align to the left side, so it's left aligned. The only reason that we're lining it up on the right side, kind of, is because it's a very long word. We'll have other titles that will be smaller, so it will just adjust accordingly. So it just looks like it's aligning. It doesn't mean that it's going to be for all of the other products. Then we're going to go back to our text file, grab Scented Candle. Paste that in, select it, it's gonna be green again, everything's green. And it goes back to Arial, rounded. And you can leave it at 8 point. I'm gonna tighten up the tracking. I don't think it has any tracking applied to it, but I'm just gonna apply 10 because it's very, very small text, so I might move that space at this size just to do it. Okay, so we want to put it towards the bottom, but we don't want to get too close to the bottom. There's a little lip on this, so we don't even want to come close to that lip. We always want to make sure that we're working with sort of an invisible margin with our panels, because they do wrap. The material does wrap around a little bit. Depending on the material, if it's a thicker stock, hard stock, we could get quite a lot of wrap that happens, and so you get stretching that happens around these edges. So we want to make sure that our written content cells sits well within that display area, so it's not affected by anything such as that. And then lastly, we want to place in our image, so we've got these mint leaves to put in. So just go File, Place, and you're going to grab these mint leaves here, and they're a TIFF file. So again, a TIFF file is just a universally used file format for print. Doesn't mean that you can use other formats for sure. We'll start seeing WebP probably used just as much as TIFF, but they essentially do the same thing. They can be lossless or lossy. In our case, for print, we're using lossless, so we don't want any compression added to it at all. We want it to be high resolution, so 300 dpi or above. But TIFF and WebP support transparency. They support an alpha channel, okay? Which we need for this because we don't want to have the background of what these leaves were originally sitting against. So I've gone in, gotten rid of that background so that we've got that transparency, and the TIFF supports the alpha channel, and so it would get it just as we have it here. So we need to scale it down proportionately, please. So again, holding down Shift, do not give me any images that look like this. I still am receiving images in work files where people are stretching, and I had it in the Fanshawe document where people are stretching and squishing their images. It always looks bad, and it's very unprofessional. So really be mindful when you're scaling objects to ensure that you're doing it proportionately. So in this case, just Shift, and we'll scale it down. And we're putting it above the word scented. Just sort of sits above that word scented. Gives us a little visual. And my aroma and my tantalizing mint needs to go with it. generally speaking, in a program like Photoshop, if we scaled this down, we would have to commit to that size. We're changing the properties, the physical properties of that object. In this case, I've scaled it down a little bit too much. I don't want it quite that small. I'm allowed to, in Illustrator, again, I'm doing it proportionally, but I am allowed to scale this back up without pixelating the object, because it's all referencing an external file, all right? The file doesn't exist in Illustrator. It's placed in there, but it's just being represented. So I'm not, as long as I don't exceed the original physical size of the object when it came in, I can scale it however I want to scale it, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I'm not losing quality. If I do that in Photoshop, every time I make a scale and I commit to it, it's permanent. So if I scale it back up, it's going to pixelate. And then if I scale it down and scale it back up, it's going to repixelate. In Illustrator, not an issue. I can scale it however I want. Same with InDesign. I can make it any size I want, as long as I don't exceed the size, physical size, the aspect ratio of the original image that I'm using for this project that sits in my images folder wherever I have it, okay? So bear that in mind, that I can sort of play with this sizing as I see fit. Okay, so that looks pretty good. The leaves have been tinted with the brand color. So this is what I'm talking about. We are in charge of every aspect of design, everything. So with your style guide, I said I would love to see your sketches, because you've done the work. So put it in your style guide. Now, would you normally put sketches in a style guide? No, I've never had a style guide. I've never had a brand document that had sketches in it. But this is for school, and I like to see the progress. I like to see how it developed. So I want to see those things. But I would appreciate if you didn't just take them and slap them into the document and say, there they are. You know, dress it up a little bit. This is all about branding. It's all about making things look good. So I want you to do that with everything that you're working on. So these mint leaves don't look like that, because mint leaves are typically, they're a bit more green. These look like they've been sitting around for a few days. Probably not something you want to put in someone's drink. So they're not really ideal for that representation. But because they are a branded thing, they're a branded feature of this product, I've gone in and I've actually tinted it with 160-8 Pantone value so that it mimics those colors of my brand. And it's consistent with the coloring of everything else. Okay, so there's our aroma packaging. Like I say, for this, it would likely be, the material would be, it would be white underneath, so it would just be on cardstock. I might use metallic ink to paint this green. So this whole area might be green with a metallic ink, or I might print against some sort of metallic substrate. The reason for using metallic is because I'm putting a candle that has wax inside of it. If the candle sort of sloughs off some of the wax, or some of the wax gets off the candle, gets onto the packaging, if it's an uncoated cardstock, it's going to look stained. It's going to absorb the oils from that wax, right? And I don't want that. It's unseemly, right? So we got to be thinking, if the product were to leak, which it could very easily do in this case, or sort of flake off, I don't want those flakes to affect or stain and affect that component of the design. So by making this a metallic material or a metallic ink, which would not absorb that oil, it would just the stuff would just sit on top, then it makes this look a lot nicer when people take the lid off. They see their candle, and then they see sort of this green, this Pantone value, in sort of a metallic value. And then they take the candle out, and like I say, we might have, against the green, we might have white text that says, don't leave a candle unattended, and all sort of the safety things that go along with it. 100% natural, whatever else we want to communicate. Okay? All right, let's take a break there. When you come back, we'll work on the templates. So if you have scissors, we'll cut these out, and then you can fold them up. I'm not going to tell you how to fold it up. It looks pretty self-explanatory, but I'm willing to bet that some of you won't get it. And that's fine. That's why we're doing it, to sort of go, well, how do you do this? And then when you get